The following program is a production of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion with Mary Hirschfeld. I'm Eileen Cavanaugh from the Hennepin County Library Program Office, and my guest today is Mary Hirschfeld, who is a divorce lawyer and a therapist, and who has written a book, The Adult Children of Divorce Workbook. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're glad to have you here from Los Angeles. You have a wonderful background to have written this book. You're a divorce lawyer, and you're a therapist, and you've worked in divorce mediation. What sparked your interest in children of divorce?
Well, as you can well imagine, I have spent a lot of time in this field, but I think originally what sparked my interest was the fact that my marriage broke up at the time that I was practicing law, and all of a sudden I was deeply interested in divorce for obvious reasons. The experience of divorce and the concept of divorce are so different that I just immediately found myself plunged into an emotional abyss, and from that, and from watching my children grow up and having problems, and their friends having problems. As you know, in Los Angeles, we have a lot of divorces. So I was one of the originators of divorce mediation as a result, because I could no longer participate in the family destruction that goes on in the courts.
That's true. Often the divorce, which is bad enough in itself, gets a lot worse once adversary lawyers come in place. How does divorce mediation work around that problem of the adversarial relationship?
Divorce mediation handles the psychological issues while you're trying to work out an agreement. And so you have both sides of the emotions and the practical issues in one room. And as a result, you don't have to go and play out your anger. You can, that's what we have words for. You can talk about your anger. Why do I have to sell the house? A typical issue. You know, if it weren't for you, and if this, and if you had to give more money, and whatever. You can talk it out, and you can hear both people's points of view and share the pain, and miracles happen in being able to bring conflicts to a resolution.
As opposed to going to an attorney who's going to probably shy away from any discussion of emotional issues.
Shy away, they're not used to dealing with it. They don't have the expertise. I have taught lawyers in seminar sessions for certification in family law how to deal with emotions, and they don't want to hear it. I mean, they just, okay, let me just learn enough about it to pass my exam, and that's it, you know. They don't want to deal with that. Although, I will say there are a few attorneys who really are sensitive, but they're bound by legal ethics, which is to represent the best interest of their client. I think the client should be the family, rather
Actually,
than
it is the family, whether they like it or not.
Well, but it isn't. It is the individuals, adults in the family, and with all the power that the court vests in this process, those interests become more and more divisive and split.
Now, what about the children's part in divorce mediation? Are their wants and needs heard?
Children don't participate in divorce mediation. It's only the parents. That, I think, is closer to divorce therapy. You can listen to children if you wanted to deal with the custody issues, but just in terms of my preference is to help the parents decide, just like in an intact family. You know, the parents ought to make the decisions that are right for the family. And if you help the parents be strong and be a team, then the children don't have to get involved. You spare them the pain.
And in divorce mediation, there is no need then to have a formal attorney and to have hearings and that sort of thing. It just...
Oh, yes, there is. Divorce mediation is simply a way to get there. And when I was doing mediation, I always encouraged people to have advisory attorneys to make sure that there are impartial parties. I mean, I was impartial, but I was neutral. And there are impartial parties who are not neutral, but take a look at it from the point of view of each side and make sure that no great injustice is perpetrated. And then you still have to go to court and have a hearing and put the
So the
stamp of
divorce
approval, say
mediation is an additional step that a couple can choose to use.
Well, it supplants a lot of the court proceedings. All you have to do is finalize the agreement in court, at least by California law. You know, every state has its own divorce laws, so I can't speak to the divorce laws in this area of the country.
Well, let's talk about the children of divorce and some of the problems that they experience. Now, I assume that children at different ages experience different problems. Let's talk about the toddler as opposed to the adolescent child of divorce.
Whatever the child's engaged in dealing with at the time is the area in which they're going to be most affected. Let's take like the most difficult, one of the most difficult ages that the parents can get a divorce, which is between ages of 3 and 5. And the conscience is just about born at that age. And so the child starts to see that if something goes wrong, it may be my fault. So with that budding conscience, experiencing the divorce is very difficult to tell a child or take away that guilt from them. If only I had been good, my parents wouldn't have divorced. If only I were, of course these are not the words they use, but this is the sense that they have. There's something wrong with me, otherwise my parents would not have divorced. They would have, my father, typically the father leaves and the mother is the custodial parent, or even if it's joint parenting, the mother is the physical custodial parent. And the children just suffer greatly. They get this deep ravine in their sense of worth that takes years to rediscover, because eventually these injuries go underground to emerge when they're adults. That's why so many adult children of divorce don't realize that what's wrong with their life is not that there is something inherently wrong with them, but that there is something left over to recover from.
So in the workbook, one of the things that you ask the child is to think about what age he or she was, or what stage of development he or she was at when the divorce occurred.
Yes. And for instance, if a child is an adolescent and is 13, 14, 15, they are engaged in trying to find out what they mean to their peers, both in their sexual relations, their budding adult love relationships, and also in friendships. So if they're injured in that area mostly, and because that's what's most vulnerable. The area in which you are just exploring is the area that's most vulnerable, and so the divorce will be damaging in those ways.
And peer approval is so strong among adolescent children.
Very much so. One of the things that I found to be common in adolescence is that after a divorce, and soon after the divorce, a lot of sexual experimentation starts. It's like they advance in their behavior to adult activities, even though emotionally there's some regression going on. So there's this dichotomy where they feel very young and vulnerable, but they throw themselves into sexual experimentation to try to gain some of that love that they're losing over here.
And a terrible double bind if you think that emotionally they're regressing and less able to deal with a rather grown-up decision.
Oh, definitely. It's hard enough to handle adolescent sexuality in the first place. It's a little bit like, it's just a very difficult time. You're pushing the envelope, as they used to say, and with experimenting with our atmosphere, and it's the same thing. They're experimenting with their sort of psychological and sexual atmosphere, trying to find out where their limits are. It's very important at that time that the parents provide appropriate boundaries. As much as they hate those boundaries and they push against them, they try to break through them, the more they need it. You know? And so, in addition to sexual experimentation, one of the things that happens is they try to counteract these terrible feelings they're getting with drug and alcohol use and abuse. And so there's a lot of that takes place after a family breaks up.
So speaking of the boundaries, then what might be your advice to parents who are in the divorce process and who have adolescent children?
You know, that, of course, is not the book that I have written, because by my view, the best thing for a family to do is to try to stay together until the children are grown and gone. And I know that's not a popular view. 1 out of 2 marriages ends in divorce, and usually while the children are still at home. I mean, you look at today's statistics, 4 out of 10 children will be in a divorced home if they were born in 1983. 5 out of 10 will be in a parental separation. 6 out of 10 will live in a single-parent home some part of their childhood. And lots of these children will also live in blended families. So it's just staggering to think that our little ones, our most vulnerable, our national treasure, will have to go through a lot of these really difficult issues in their childhood. So after having interviewed 200 people and having heard the painful stories, I became convinced that the best thing a family can do is to try to work it out. But in the event they really can't, and of course, where there's sexual abuse, where there's physical abuse and significant psychological abuse, it's best for the children to live out of that atmosphere, or the adolescents to live out of that atmosphere. But the best thing the parents can do is the common sense thing. Don't fight. Do all the things that were right for child rearing while you were a happy family. Have your fights elsewhere. Don't let that bleed into the family relationships. Be more mature than your children. Take care of business. Make sure that you cooperate in your parenting. If you provide those kinds of that kind of safety net for your children, the result will be much better. But as you and I both know, typically, divorce brings out the worst in good people. I mean, we're not talking about bad people. We're not talking about evil people. We're talking about good, decent folk. Love brings out the best. The end of love brings out the worst. And the children see our worst faces as well as our best faces. So it's very difficult to create a divorce that isn't in some way injurious to a child. If you can do it, more power to you.
So you're saying, perhaps, in your book, that children need healing from those worst faces that they have seen, too, in the divorce. And I guess we should clarify that the book is written for the children when they've become adults, after the fact of divorce has taken place, in an attempt to offer them some exercises for healing. And some of the exercises that I think are very interesting are journaling and visualization. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about both of those, journaling and visualization, because they've been dealt with in a lot of other contexts, but as ways of healing divorce after the child has presumably had some distance from it.
Mm-hmm. Adults often don't realize that the problems they're having in their lives, adults who grew up with divorce, the problems they're having in their lives, and particularly problems with relationships, are the result of an old injury they just haven't yet recovered from. So what I attempted to do is to draw a carefully laid out map for recovery. Divorce is a very complex subject, so there are a lot of different parts to it. And one of the parts is not adult children of divorce not knowing the facts of their childhood. A lot of it gets buried in the ashes of the marriage. So I encourage them to take a walking tour through their childhood, get old pictures out, get information, talk to old family friends, neighbors that you used to have, and find out what really was going on. It'll make a lot more sense to you once you know all the facts, and you will no longer be bound by the bias of whichever parent you might have taken the side of. Because the children very often adopt the point of view of one parent and then feel guilty and secretly loyal to the other. And if it doesn't come out in any other way, it comes out in the way they behave. They'll take on the behavior of that parent whom they, without even consciously knowing, are loyal to, but whom openly they may be angry at or even hate, and that's really don't like at all. But yet they act just like that parent. So the part that they deny in themselves is the part that emerges in their behavior. It's paradoxical, but it's true. So one of the things that I do in journaling and some of the exercises is, for instance, in the loyalty issue, to draw a map of your family and see who you are overtly loyal to and who you are secretly loyal to. Different color pens. You write everybody's name on this piece of paper. It becomes a very interesting experience. In the visualization, it's a wonderful way, as we all know, to reach deeply into your unconscious, because we trigger parts of our minds that we may not be able to trigger when we're with eyes open and in this sort of external atmosphere. When you go inside with your eyes closed and you conjure up certain scenes, for instance, in the area of dating, one of the things that's really hard to do for adult children of divorce is to start to fall in love and go gradually into a relationship. They either hold it at arm's length or they plunge. Here I am, second date. Is this a relationship yet? Well, let's go together. And of course, it's playing Russian roulette because you can't know that other person well enough. Sometimes it works out well. Lots of surprises may come about. So I instruct the people, first of all, to tape their own voices on a tape recorder, because it's very healing to listen to instructions from your own voice rather than someone else's. And in this exercise, they are to conjure up their boyfriend, girlfriend, fellow lady, and allow them to come into your life and allow them to go out of your life while you conjure up good feelings about their leaving. Because that's a real fear that you're counteracting, the fear of abandonment. And it makes you more relaxed with realizing that love grows in the separateness as much as it grows in the togetherness. And it's a new learning experience for adult children of divorce.
And realizing, too, that we have other friends who come and go in our lives, and our lives are not destroyed because a friend has moved to a different state or whatever. That friend still lives in some level in our behavior and in our hearts.
That's true. And with friends, you don't have your value, your total value tied up. It's, if this friend leaves, I'm nothing. But that's how adult children of divorce feel. If this person whom I love goes away, it means I'm nothing. It's a big penalty to pay. And of course it's not true.
But it's hard sometimes to convince children that it's not true.
Yes.
That the parent didn't leave because they were not a lovable person.
Yes, that's right.
You interviewed, you used about 25 of the interviews in your book, and another 200 that sort of were behind it all. What did you find, did you find common bad effects of divorce among these interviewees? Yes,
there were some pretty typical ones. And one of the things I asked them, how would you be different today if your parents hadn't divorced? What do you think? And they said, I'd feel much better about myself. So low self-esteem was one. Clearly, the ability to trust people in love relationships was one. The ability to create appropriate emotional bonds in love relationships. Again, they either attach very quickly or they can't let go of attachments. The codependency issues are rampant among adult children of divorce. Or else they have trouble just sort of maintaining relationships. You know, they come and go and they sort of fall apart without them knowing why. A sense of emotional entitlement that I'm worth loving. You know, it's a little different than what we've been talking about. They get a lot of emphasis on money. You know how much those shoes cost, and your father hasn't given me the check yet, and you go asking for it. You tell your mother that she's spending too much. You know, those kinds of typical issues that the children remain the last battleground about. Well, they feel emotionally entitled to money because of that, to material goods. So a lot of adult children of divorce are out there very successful in life financially. Emotionally, because of the abandonment and lack of available attention after the divorce, they feel not entitled to love. So it's a flip-flop. I think most of my generation...
Money replaces love.
It's like in two different worlds. Money is something they're really familiar with, they've dealt with, and they've had a lot of arguments about, and they know how much they cost.
And perhaps can have some control over money where you don't control love.
Much more so, that's right. And control is a big issue with adult children of divorce. They need to control. They make great managers. Some of the adult children of divorce I interviewed are bank executive president and vice presidents and major motion picture stars, and they're very successful, very skillful in creating good business relationships.
Or maybe they decide to focus in on that if they in their own mind thought they weren't successful with.
Yeah, it's a substitution. But also, a lot of them said, what happened to my mother, who was the custodial parent in most instances, poverty, which accompanies the divorced mother very often, is not going to happen to me. I'm going to know what to do. I'm not going to be financially helpless. I'm going to establish a financial base for myself. Yeah.
Are there statistics that show, for instance, do children whose parents were divorced have a higher rate of divorce themselves?
Yes.
Significantly?
Yes, significantly.
Sad.
Also, a higher anxiety, recurring anxiety. They use more mental health services, a lot of those kinds of issues, but definitely they are at higher. Well, it makes sense. You know all about divorce, but you don't know how marriages endure. You haven't seen it demonstrated that people can get unhappy and then get happy again with each other, and then maybe have some problems and then work it out. You're going to have an argument, and even a bad one, and make whatever the changes are necessary to work out the relationship and come back together and work around it. They don't have that kind of model. And that's what happens in marriages. I mean, marriages are not a piece of cake. They're a series of negotiations because we change in marriages, and we need to be allowed to change. We need to allow our partners to change. And so there's always some dynamic movement going on in a good relationship.
How about gender of children? Is this a factor? Do boys, for instance, fare better or worse than girls?
They fare badly, depending on the age and depending on the circumstances. Boys that have been abandoned by their fathers have really deep wounds in their masculinity. It's very difficult for them to value the fact that they're men, and often take on more of the female characteristics, where the girls become tough-minded and a little harder than their contemporaries from intact homes. So, it's different for each.
In preparing for this interview, I was thinking how much things have changed. When my youngest daughter was 12, she felt bad that she was from a divorced home and that most of her friends came from traditional families. 5 years later, when she was in high school, I reminded her that now only one of her friends came from a traditional family, and the rest of her rather broad group of friends were all divorced or single-parent families or non-traditional families, and that seemed amazing to me. That for many friends, only one was in a traditional family setting, and she no longer felt felt different.
She didn't feel the stigma.
Yes. So I guess a question that's just coming to my mind then is that helpful to children, the fact that there is unfortunately more divorce today, but it's also more common and there's also more peer support perhaps for them? Is that a help, or is it still a problem?
I think divorce is painful no matter how many people go through it. I mean, if you have stomach surgery, it's not going to hurt any less because your neighbor had stomach surgery. Sure. It's very painful, but at least the stigma isn't there.
And there are some people to support you and say, yes, I know, I kind of know how it was.
Yes, that's true. Share the experience.
Is there a difference too? It seems to me sometimes it isn't the divorce per se, but the failure of parents to resolve conflicts that is upsetting to the children. And also, sometimes it occurs to me that the personality of the child, there may be children who will drift through divorce in a rather blasé fashion, and some children who are very wounded and very pained by divorce, and even in the same family. So that it seems there are cases in which the divorce itself really doesn't explain it's like it's filtered through different filters for different children.
Oh yes, that's very true. And some children are so resilient that they're able to withstand a lot more than others. Depends on which child was more attached to the parent who's leaving, what they needed for themselves. Well, men and women parent differently, and we need both halves. We need the male and we need the female in order for us to become balanced human beings, because we all have male and female within us. So depending on what each child's need was, that's what is going to be missing from their life.
Before our time runs out, I want to make sure that adult children of divorce know where they can get this wonderful workbook, which will be helpful to them. And it's very useful and usable. The exercises, there are case studies, there are some interpretations of the case studies, there is psychological advice, and then there are the exercises that people can work at leisurely as they have the time. And so I want to tell people that this book is available at the library, and there is also a 1-800 number where people can order the book, and it's 1-800-288-2131, and I think that number will appear on the screen too. So either go to your library or your bookstore or call and order it.
Yes, that's lovely, and it should also be in the bookstores, but the library is a wonderful place to get it. I'm delighted to hear that you have several copies, yes?
We have it on order. I don't believe it's arrived yet, but
wonderful.
I certainly do recommend it, and it's a great book. Thank you for being with us, Mary.
It's my pleasure, Eileen. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.